Hi, this is Richard Barrett for Guitarist Magazine, and I'm here with two of the Epiphone inspired by Gibson Custom Shop line. The Epiphone brand, of course, was originally a sister brand to Gibson, built in the Kalamazoo facility along with the Gibson guitars. Later, it became more of an entry-level line, perhaps we could say, and in more recent years, the spec has been edging closer and closer to the Gibson US-made counterparts, where now we're at a point where perhaps it's never been closer. So this begs the question, do you need to spend the extra money on the Gibson counterpart? Well, it depends. As you'll have just heard, I had a bit of a play on each of the guitars and tried to cover a few of the more common tonal basses. And I'm going to get into more specifics of each one, starting with this Les Paul. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk you through the signal chain. I'm plugged into the studio's Marshall JTM 45 Mark II reissue. With an isolated cab, I want to preserve the hearing that I have left. That's set for a reasonably clean sound. Is it crystal clear? Well, it's a Les Paul into a Marshall, so no, not really. But I think it's clean enough for you to be able to tell. If you're one of the very rare people that wants to hear a Les Paul sounding absolutely clean, then you can tell what it would be like. For the drive, I've used my trusty modified Boss Super Overdrive, which does a really good job into the Marshall. Different amps like different pedals, but this is a really good match. Right, let's get down to business. The spec of these, as I've already mentioned, is closer to the USA Gibson counterpart than I think Epiphone have ever gone before. We have the vintage correct parts in every aspect, starting with these Epiphone Deluxe branded single ring Cluson type tuners with the tulip buttons. We have the aged mother of pearl inlaid logo. A mahogany one-piece neck with what Epiphone are describing as the medium rounded 50s. I'll talk a bit more about that later, actually. And it's a bound rosewood fretboard. That's proper rosewood, not a substitute. Mother of pearl inlays, medium jumbo frets, vintage correct position marker size and placement, so I'm told. And we have the heel, I've noticed, is actually closer to the Gibson. The Epiphone heel used to be a bit different. We have a one-piece mahogany body and a carved maple top with a slightly more figured veneer. So it is the proper depth and shape that you would expect, but the actual top layer here, the finish, is a veneer. You've just got a slightly more pretty flame going on. Hardware, well, switchcraft output and three-way selector, as you would find on the US Gibsons. CTS pots, as you will find on the US Gibsons. Bumblebee tone capacitors, as you will find on the original 50s Gibsons. These are the Gibson Custom buckers, so they're a vintage spec around about just over $7 8.6. I think this one is 7.6 in the bridge, 7.8 in the neck. So they're very much as the original vintage Les Pauls were. They're not a different pickup calibrated for neck and bridge, though you can adjust that with the heights. They're Alnico 3 magnets, which is, in my opinion, a very nice compromise. Alnico 5 can be very bright. It can suit an individual guitar. Alnico 2 can be quite mushy, though this all depends on other factors like the wind. So this is sitting in quite a sweet spot, in my opinion. We have aluminium tailpiece, which again is a nod towards the original 50s Gibson spec, rather than the kind of zinc alloy, the heavier ones that you will get on the later guitars. We have an ABR1 style bridge. It's not an ABR1, but it's very similar to that. In my opinion, a slightly weak spot because the saddles aren't quite up to the standard that you would get on the US Gibson. I'll talk about that a bit more later, and it's not a deal breaker, but it's worth mentioning. The finish is what Epiphone, when I say the finish, I mean the type of finish. It's what Epiphone describe as vintage gloss. So they're not saying that this is a nitro finish, and they're not saying it's a poly finish, but they're saying it's like a nitro finish. So that leads me to believe it may be a very fine poly finish, and it certainly looks good when you think back to the Epiphones of 15-20 years ago with that ultra high gloss poly. You know, some people like that, so I'm not knocking it, but if you're looking for a more vintage Gibson type look, then this is definitely it. And it feels like it's been very nicely applied. It's not been sprayed, you know, on really thickly or anything like that. This particular guitar is washed bourbon burst. It looks a little bit like tobacco sunburst as well, which is what people used to call these darker bursts. There is a little bit more of a red element perhaps than a tobacco burst, but I think we can agree that it looks pretty good. Right, let's look in a bit more detail at the sounds and how it is operating one of these. So we've got what I'm calling the almost clean sound here. Not quite sure I'll get away with calling that almost clean, but it's clean enough for me. I suppose that gives me a good segue into operating these controls, because what if I want to trim that back a bit? That's the traditional way of using a Les Paul and a Marshall. Set it so that it's pushing a bit and then bring it back. So I'll do the full fat again, then I'll bring it down a bit on this bridge pickup. Epiphone's spec doesn't say if this is 50s wiring or anything. 50s wiring, of course, is known for cleaning up in a bit more of an even way as you turn the volume control down. You don't have the top end loss that some of the later guitars have. And that's not a quality issue. That's just a different way of wiring, the order that the pots appear in the circuit. So in practice, this means that you can turn the guitar down and clean things up without completely changing the tone. You've just got less gain. So that's down to about 8, I think, without my glasses on. Let's leave it like that for the moment, and I'm interested to hear the bumblebee caps. So on this bridge pickup, it's quite subtle. I haven't gone all the way down yet. That's about 7. Wow. I think that's 50s wide because of the way the tone controls operate. But I would be willing to be corrected on that. The tone controls cut the mids a bit more when the volume controls are down with 50s wiring. It can be quite complicated to explain. But I think it makes the guitar quite versatile, and I was almost hearing a bit of the Peter Green vibe going on there, though this isn't wired out of phase. Okay, let's hear them both. There's a bit of a snap at the top end that you expect from a PAF, but it's not excessively bright. There is a slight softness, and I think that is down to the Alnico 3 magnets, at least in part. Obviously, when you've got a whole circuit and a guitar made of mahogany with a maple top, everything makes its contribution, and the leads, the amp, but I'm thinking that the Alnico 3 has a sweetness. And now the neck. It doesn't quite have the body that the 335 has, but it's still a great sound. That's up full. Let's clean up a bit. So it's completely possible to trim the output of the guitar to your liking without paying a price tonally. Let's see where we get with that tone control. That was off. Now let's go back to about halfway. And right up again. What I'm getting from here is that this has all the finesse of the Gibson counterpart. Sometimes on the less expensive guitars, you can find that things like that, the tone control, the operation of the volume controls, doesn't quite have that same finesse. You tend to have a bit more of an on or off quality, where I think that each setting of this tone control probably has something different to offer. And being, I believe, 50s wide, let's hear this tone control turned down with the volume on 10. And I'll take the volume control off 10. And I'm hearing much more of a scoop in the sound. That's not something that you get with the modern wiring. So I hope I'm right about this. I think that's what I'm hearing. Okay, let's have another little walk through with a bit of gain applied. Let's first of all hear everything on 10 and with the drive. Okay, the same applies. There's a little bit of bite and snap on the top, but lots of body to the sound, which I think you do need, because bright cuts through a mix, but sometimes only the bright cuts through a mix. And to me, that leads to really thin sounds. Let's hear the volume control operating on that bridge pickup. I mean, I'm doing it by ear, but I can just about see that that's on 5. I think that the 50s wiring tends to give better results when you've got a bit of gain on there, because it does suddenly slope off. So we've got... So if this makes sense, you get a bit more travel, a bit more usable travel in the volume control with a dirty sound. More traditional wiring, or modern wiring, I should say, tends to have a slower slope, which works really well clean. But then when you add a lot of gain, or some gain, this isn't super dirty, then you have to go down quite a long way before you really hear the difference. You lose top end before you lose gain. Some people like that. That's not a criticism, but I personally quite like the taper that you get with this kind of wiring. So with the guitar on about halfway like this, why don't I pull down that tone to about halfway and see what we get? That is actually got quite a nice brightness on the very top end and a bit of a scoop in what I would call a sort of high mids. That's what I'm hearing in the room here anyway. I think that the reason Gibson changed from that wiring is because there were people who perceived that as a bit of an issue. It was unpredictable. It wasn't what they expected a tone control to do. Personally, as I say, I really like it. So that works well. The in-between selection there is, as you would expect. Down at the bottom there, you tend to get a bit more of a homogeneous kind of could be the neck pickup. I don't know, though I would say that this does preserve its sort of tonal fingerprint. Let's flip to the neck. Take it down a bit further. I know that when Jimmy Page played on Since I've Been Loving You and Ramble On, he'd use the neck pickup with the volume down a bit and the tone down a bit, I think, just to get... Obviously, copyright reasons, can't play the tune. So you really are getting something that will do a similar job to a 50s Les Paul. Hopefully that covers how this thing is put together. One thing that I haven't mentioned, that this has a tusk nut, so there's no need to be crumbling graphite. It's very well cut. It's a pity that the bridge isn't up to the same standard. When I say that, it's really the saddles themselves. You would expect the saddles to be cut so that the radius of the strings matches the fretboard. And on this guitar, it's a little uneven. The B string's a little bit low. On the 335, the A string's a little bit low. Again, it's not a major thing, and a lot of dealers will set the guitar up for you at the point of purchase, so you could perhaps stipulate that that is taken care of. It really is probably about a 15-minute job to put that right for an experienced tech. So, time to unplug the Les Paul and let's have a look at the 335. So as you can see, I've changed over to the 335 and I'll talk you through some of the basic specs of this before we get into more detail. We've got a similar spec. We have the 2-ring Epiphone Deluxe Clusen type tuners with the tulip buttons. We've got a one-piece mahogany neck again, but this time it's the more slim taper 60s profile. This is, after all, the 62 335. It's not a 59. This 62 is unique to Epiphone. Gibson don't presently offer a 62 spec 335, so that's one reason why maybe you would be choosing to go with the Epiphone if you want this spec. Rosewood board again. We've got the small block inlays, and again, they're mother of pearl, they're not plastic. Medium jumbo frets. And I have to say, actually, that on both of these guitars, the fretting, the edges of the fretboard, the sort of fret work is great. I did give the action a tweak on both of them out of the box. I think that that's something that I would probably do anyway, because I'm picky. We have the custom bucker pickups again. These are the Alnico 3. I should mention that these aren't wax potted. The original Gibson Paths weren't wax potted either. We have the CTS pots. We've got the Switchcraft jack and selector. We have different capacitors in this guitar. They are Black Beauty paper in oil, and that is vintage correct for this guitar. Well, let's have a look at how this sounds and have a play with the controls. So, same rig, the bridge pickup flat out. I think it might be set slightly lower relative to the strings on this guitar, but let's see what we get. Well, I'm getting a different sound from that. Part of that is going to be because we have this maple centre block, which is what a 335 is known for. Though we have the semi-hollow construction, that is a 5-ply of poplar and maple. So it's going to sound a bit different. And I'm hearing louder and cleaner, but I don't see how that's possible. But Now, I'm not going to be too bold about saying whether this is 50s wiring or not. It seems like it might be. Once we come down to 8, we get a real slope off there, and it really cleans up even more. And if anything, it seems brighter, but that might just be what I'm hearing in the room. If I bring back the tone control, I'm going to bring that back up to 10 and reduce the tone. So I'll play some more of that in a minute, but what I'm hearing immediately is that there's a slower sort of taper at the top 2/3, and then it really does shut down there, and you hear much more of the mids. So again, this is more refined than the kind of on-off type effect that you'll get with a more budget spec. That could be a really good thing as well, that drops off like that, because you could set the amp up quite bright, and you know that you bump the tone control up and you've got super cutting sound, but generally you could be keeping this on about 6. All right, let's put everything back to 10 and I'll go for the middle selection. A little bit of extra brightness, I think, there, but there's lots of body to the sound as well. The 335 definitely has a different sound to the Les Paul. Let's have a listen to the neck pickup, which is really nice on this one. That's everything flat out. It's really got that richness to it, but it's got the detail at the top end. Let's bump that off 10, back to about 8. So we've got a guitar that you can really make the most of the volume and tone controls on, in a way that you'll probably seen Joe Bonamassa talking about online. You can really make these subtle adjustments and get some of these tones, because back in the 50s or 60s in this case, amplifiers and pedals and things were very limited, and you would really have to use every weapon at your disposal. Well, this guitar does that really well. Let's see what we get when we bring the tone control down progressively on that. It's right up, back to about 7. And down about half. And then for completeness sake, let's roll the thing all the way off. So that last little bit of travel there really does change, absolutely. Though I stress that there is a very usable 3/4 of the travel before we get there. So that's clean. Let's have a little look with a bit of dirt on there. I'm thinking very Clapton vibes, actually. What if we were to just take that tone off a little bit, just to smooth the edges of the top 3 strings? And a bit more, down to about half. Okay, I'm liking that. Now let's take the bridge pickup down to about halfway. As I was saying a minute ago, you really can get lots of different colours out of this depending on where you set the controls, so that's great. What about in the middle? That sounds really fruity to me. And let's go for the neck. I was thinking at the end of that, down at the bottom, on the bottom strings there, with a dirty sound like that on the neck pickup, it is asking for trouble, basically. Quite a lot of guitars don't sound that great down there, and you end up avoiding that area, or at least I do. But I'm finding that these pickups are really able to give you the clarity, and I'm going to try taking that down off 10 on about 6. Let's go down a bit further, down 4.5 or 4. I'm genuinely impressed with the versatility there, though I do notice that on this guitar the neck pickup is set quite high, so if it were my guitar I might lower that a little bit and it might make it match with the bridge pickup. I mean, it's not completely unbalanced, nothing like that. I think tonally I would like to hear it a bit more distant, and then probably wouldn't have to turn it down quite so far. Mind you, it still cleans up great. That's down on about 3. My brain is calibrated to reach down and go for about halfway, so maybe that's why I would do that. But either way, what you've got there is a very versatile layout. Let's bring the tone down a bit. And then all the way down. I'm reminded a little bit of Justin Hayward on some of the Moody Blues records, where I think he might reduce the tone right down and play through a kind of old fuzz pedal. So that's the 335 put through its paces. A couple of differences from the Les Paul in terms of spec. Obviously the bodywoods and those caps on the tone controls. Well, we come back to the question we came in with. Do you need to spend the extra money for the USA Gibson version of these? Unfortunately, this is not an easy one-word answer. Let's have a quick look at what you're getting for your money. You've got the right woods, the right electronics and hardware, with the exception of that Tune-o-matic bridge, which will be coming straight off if it were mine. The neck calves, yeah, they're close. I think the Gibson neck calves are slightly different. I'm not saying better, I'm just saying they're slightly different. We've got the Gibson style open book headstock shape, which will please many people, and it would please me if I'm honest. The Epiphone logo looks classic, it looks good on there. But there is the thing with Gibson where it's a Gibson. It's got the nitro finish. I mean, these are great, these vintage gloss. They may even be harder wearing. But the nitro Gibson finish will age and check in that beautiful way that vintage guitars do. And this isn't going to do that. Though I have to say, it does look very nice to me. Like so many things in life, this is going to come down to money. For the price of both of these guitars, you could get one US-made Les Paul standard. So that's worth bearing in mind. Do you need to spend more money? I think the answer is no, but it does depend what's important to you. You might want the incremental improvement or the incremental difference that you'll get with buying the Gibson. I mean, I just did. Well, that concludes this review of what I think are two very lovely guitars. If you're enjoying this content, please hit like and subscribe. And of course, if you've got anything to say about it, please add it to the comments below. Bye for now.